This afternoon we're going to have stories of local people. Some of you might know the people that are from around here. For others, I think we can all identify with some of those people. They are not famous as such in the history books, but in Port Hood they were rare individuals, interesting, entertaining. Any stories that are told are not meant, they're just in fun. There will be nothing derogatory or anything of that nature.
Some of the people that we're going to talk about were very, very much part of the fabric of the community in which I grew up. And the first person that I want to mention is a woman that we knew as Kate Liss. Her name was Catherine Elizabeth Moran, but in Port Hood she was known as Kate Liss. And she was a lady of Irish descent. She was born in a place called River Centre, which is part of metropolitan Port Hood. It's about 5 miles from the downtown area. So Kate Liss, as a young woman, did what was very, very common among the people in this area. Usually the families were large, maybe anywhere from 8 to 16 children, and people would leave here and would go away. And one of the most common places, particularly for young women, was to go to Massachusetts, or what we call the Boston States, and they would work as nannies, as housekeepers, or as cooks, or they would work in some of the industrial factories that were very, very common throughout the New England states. But Kate Liss would come home every summer. She would make the trip back to visit her parents, who were aging, and after they died around 1920, Kate Liss came back and she stayed in Port Hood for most of the rest of her life, with the exception of one of her marriage experience. Anyway, in 1924, when she was 49 years of age, Kate Liss married. And the big problem is that this area is mostly Celtic, mostly people of Irish and Scottish background, although our earliest English-speaking explorers were loyalists, the Smiths and the Worths and the Hollies, who came from the United States after the Revolution. And actually, I'm reminded, we welcome the people from Scotland. We also have 2 people visiting here from Hawaii this afternoon, so I think they've come the farthest to be with us. And the man from Hawaii has brought his mother from California as well. So they're touching roots here again. So Kate Liss had left Port Hood. She had gone to the States. She never made it as far as Hawaii, though. But she went to the States. So when she came back in 1924, I don't know how she met this man, George Cale. But the big problem was that he was Presbyterian and she was Roman Catholic. So it was difficult at that time. It was difficult to make the arrangements. However, they managed to get all their ducks in a row, and they got married at St. Ninian's Cathedral in Antigonish in 1924. So George Cale was from New Brunswick, and she went to New Brunswick, and she took with her in a boxcar some animals and some household belongings that she had. And she worked, he was a farmer, and so they worked on the farm in New Brunswick. I'm not sure which part. This lady is grew up in St. John area. So she stayed in New Brunswick for 9 years, working to make a go of the farm and a go of the marriage, but it just didn't work out. So Kate Liss pulled up her roots there, and she took what animals she had brought from Port Hood and their progeny. She put them back on the car as well as her furniture, and she moved back to Port Hood. And she was, there's Kate Liss up on East Street. Anyway, Kate Liss lived for a while with her relatives, Bridget Moran Walsh, and then she got a house. People from Port Hood know she lived out where Harry Williams and Mary Ellen lived. She was there for a while, and then she moved up to East Street, and this picture is taken on East Street. She moved into a little house that Sandy McIsaac, or little Sandy McIsaac, had up there. And later on, she moved up to John Holly's, where John Holly lived up on Marble Hill. And eventually, she spent her last days at the house on the high road where Gerard and Stella Walker lived today. But anyway, when she was living on East Street, she was over visiting with Sandy Campbell and his wife. And anyway, Mrs. Sophie Dwyer, Mrs. Dolphus Dwyer was there, Bill Paul's mother. And she asked Kate Liss, she said, what happened to the marriage? And Kate Liss said, my husband, he had blisters on his arse from sitting down doing nothing. So that was the end of the marriage. Now, I grew up in the north end of Port Hood, and my memories are, and it's more from I had two older sisters, because I have very, very vague memories of Kate Liss. I was 3 when she died, but as kids, we were scared of her. And my two older sisters, and probably from listening to their stories, all right, Kate Liss tended to wear a long black dress, and she had an apron on it with patches, and she would tend to shout at kids, and it scared us to hear her shouting at us, and of course sometimes the threat was made: if you're not good, we're going to give you to Kate Liss. And that was enough to get us all in line. Anyway, Kate Liss, maybe there's people here, we'll have a chance for people to tell stories. People might have other stories, but one story on Kate Liss was she was very, very gruff. She would come into the town of Port Hood. She lived about a mile on the outskirts, so she would walk in, and she had a dog, and the dog's name was Buster. I'm quite sure Betty. She had a dog, Buster, but anyway, she went into the corner store, which was owned by Rory McDougall, and she did her business inside, and when she came out, the dog sort of ran away from the entrance to the store towards an older man who was walking on the street. And Kate Liss said, come here, Buster. And the older man walked over to Kate Liss, and she said, not you, it's the other dog I'm talking about.
Always working in the barn with his barn outfit. But when he was going to visit, he would always slip on a red tie. Right, Gerard? A red tie, regardless of what the shirt was. The red tie was very, very important. And he would also, this would be his working outfit, and he would just slip a jacket over it. Now you'll see in a few minutes what a difference it makes. Because you'll see how charming I look. There you go. That's all you need. And you know, if you stop and think about it, John and Anne, you'll appreciate that. You know, see, he would have had Lissy, his wife, check him before he went out the door. I didn't have that luxury. But you notice that, you'll probably remember this too, that the characters back then, they always seemed to have these jackets. Where they got them, I guess if you got a suit, somebody in the family got a suit.
Got it when they got married.
Was probably when they got married. And that jacket became part of their uniform for the rest of their lives. So he loved to visit. So what he would do is he would come down to our house. We weren't very far from him. And I remember my mother saying that when we moved to Port Hood from further back in the woods, we moved to Port Hood. He was one of the first visitors that ever came. He would come all the time, and they didn't have that many visitors. So it was great. So Sandy would come, and he would always come in the middle of the morning, 10:30, something like that. So here you have this gentleman sitting on a chair there in our kitchen, talking to my mother. My mother was probably making curds, the rennet, putting the rennet in the curds. And Sandy would come in. He'd be sitting there. And my father would be out in the barn just after cleaning out the stable, putting the manure out the window. And he'd come in, and his boots and everything would be all covered in manure. He'd come in, and he'd see this guy here with a tie and his sitting in his kitchen. Now you can imagine his response. But he and Sandy Jim would have this debate back and forth. What are you doing here in the middle of the day? Don't you have something more important to do than sit around talking to the lady of the house? So that was one of the things about Sandy, was he loved to visit. The other thing about Sandy that I remember when I was growing up, he loved young people. He loved to be in the middle of a crowd of young people. So what he would do is, one of the things that they used to do, he used to spend a lot of time with Gerard and a younger Archie, his son. But they would have these what they call the Easter parade and the Christmas parade. You remember that, Dolly? Every Easter day or Easter afternoon, right after you had your dinner and everything like that, and you just wanted to kind of socialize, maybe have a few drinks or something. Everybody would pile into the car or cars and go up to Sandy Jim's. And whoever was in the house, if there were visitors there, anybody that wanted to go would go up to Sandy Jim's for what we call the Easter parade. And when you went up to Sandy Jim's, one of the first things that he did was he found a bottle of some kind of alcohol, and that was part of the visit, right? So he would take the bottle of liquor, and what he did was, we would be standing in the kitchen, and he would undo the top, and he would start. Now, Sandy was a pipe smoker, so, and he would be maybe even chewing tobacco and stuff like that. He would take the first slurp out of the bottle, and then he'd pass it to the next guy over there, and that guy would have to take one. Sometimes we would try to, in a discreet way, kind of rub it. They would take a swig, pass it to the next one. Well, one time, my sister Mary was sitting over here. Her husband had come from Halifax, and he was one of these debonair guys. Like, he had never been in these circumstances before, where you pass the bottle around. Every party he went to, it was a nice pour drink, and probably if it was brandy, it was in a brandy glass. So by the time it got around to Eldon, her husband, in the nice shiny suit, and he had watched everybody, especially, and probably Sandy Jim had 2 or 3 in the middle. He would go over to the other side and get another slurp on it. And poor Eldon had to put one of these to his mouth. Everybody had to have a drink. So that was another thing about Sandy Jim, was he loved. I think Eldon is still, every time we mention that story, his stomach still turns. That was an important part of Sandy Jim. He loved young people. Another thing that I remember about him was that he was very sentimental. Very, very sentimental for a gentleman of that time. As a matter of fact, in those times, men were real men, and Sandy Jim, when there was something that was emotional, you would actually see tears rolling down his face. He was a man that showed his emotion. He would hug. You know, my mother and my father, I can't remember ever seeing him giving my mother a hug, but I saw Sandy Jim giving her a hug. Yeah, my father would be kind of honoring him, but he was a sentimental guy. And so, when my sister Anne got married, and Gerard, her husband, Gerard lived right next door, the farm next door, so they were very close, Gerard and Sandy Jim. So when Sandy Jim got married, he was really, it was like, well, when they were dating, I remember when they were dating, they had to be careful because they never knew when Sandy Jim was going to appear. And when there's a long drive to where Gerard's farm is, where he used to live, and there's a little dip there in the driveway as you go down. So when you're in the bottom of the dip, you can't really see Gerard's father's house is over there, and Sandy Jim's house is over there. So it's kind of like out of the way. So whenever they got to the dip, for some reason or other, you know, they would stop for a little while. You can imagine what. But they never knew when Sandy Jim was going to spring upon them. So they didn't stay in the dip very long. But when they got married, they got married in the local church, and they had the reception afterwards, and Sandy Jim was very prominent. You probably see some pictures of him at the wedding. Very prominent at the wedding. And so when the time came that the groom and the bride were going to leave to go on their trip, their honeymoon, maybe it was up to Glencoe Station. They were going on their trip anyway. So here they were, St. and Jim walked them out to the car and everything like that. They're in the Pontiac, Gerard's Pontiac, and they're all ready, you know, they're going away outfit on, and they're trying to get away, and Sandy has got the door open. He's not, he didn't want, and the tears are pouring down his face. He didn't want them to leave. As a matter of fact, at one point, Anne said, I thought I was going to have the honeymoon, and Gerard would be on one side, Sandy was on the other.
Thank you.